This is Nick Black, and I'm in the Santa Monica Mountains. I'm in the home of John Saxon, and John's one of the most hard-workingest of actors. Thanks very much for taking time to talk with us, John.
My pleasure, thank you.
You were telling me you were born in New York. How did you come to acting?
Well, I think I became interested in acting very young, when I was about 15 or so, because I remember taking drama lessons in New York City. I was living in Brooklyn with my family, and I was in high school, but I was gradually losing my interest in academic studies and spending more time in Manhattan trying to find out about what it would be like to be an actor. I took classes in the evening and so on and so forth. When I got out of high school, and I really sort of got out, because I went to my teachers and said, "Don't put me back, please, because I want to go to California." And I did my best to presume upon them, and they passed me in most of the subjects. I got my, whatever you call it, degree of high school and so on, and 6 or 7 months later, or something like that, a year later, I came to Los Angeles.
So you specifically came to California to be in movies?
Right, I did. I had made some contacts and connections, and I took sort of angels, what do they say, go where, I don't forget the saying, but...
Angels go where fear to tread or something.
Yeah, fools go where angels fear to tread. That's what it is. That was it. I had no idea. I just decided. I saved up a little bit of money. I had a one-way ticket. Luckily, when I arrived, I had made a contact. I had an agent, and I was taken to studios, and I auditioned at Universal Studio, and within 3 weeks, this was that they said, okay, they had a roster of some 30 to 35 young players that they hoped would become somebody, you see. So they signed me on, and that was my, wow, it was a, what do you call it, an epiphany. I woke up and I said, I can't believe it, My own apartment. A little later, I got my own car. I couldn't believe my independence.
That's remarkable. I mean, it sounds so easy when people are trying to desperately break in. Was it as easy as all that?
That part was, yeah, but that was just the start. The whole thing about having a career is that as long as you keep doing it, it never ends, and it presents new opportunities and always differences and difficulties as you go on. Yeah.
So, were you excited and nervous when you got your first... What was your first film? The first acting job in a feature film?
I did a couple of little things. I did a television show called The Medic before I think I did any film work, and I appeared in a short subject, musical short subject the studios used to make. They, had a band and a little skit story surrounding a band, and we were taught to do a lot of surrounding work, like what is called dubbing or looping. Players who had come to do 2 or 3 days work and the sound was compromised bad by airplanes or something like that. They used the contract players to do the voiceover, so I started doing that. But the first major role I had was in a film called The Unguarded Moment.
With Esther Williams?
Yeah, with Esther Williams, correct.
How was that? How was Esther?
Well,
She was a big star.
Yeah, she was. Esther kept giving me very, very firm suggestions about how I should act. It wasn't so much that I just knew what I could do, and I knew what I couldn't do, and taking somebody else's idea about how I should play something, I wasn't able to do. At one point in the film, toward the end of the film, I got a reputation. They couldn't manage me, as it were. But it was all for the better, because I think I must have done the film well enough, because then the studio decided that I was going to be promoted. They were going to stick me in a lot of the films. And there was a guy, and I wish I could remember his name, who was part of Universal in Australia. I can picture him very well. I think his name was Alfred something or other, but I can't remember. He seemed to be one of my champions, as a matter of fact. And as a matter of fact, he came and he had a talk with me because he had heard that I was a little ornery or something, and he said, now my boy, or something like this, you've got a big future and I'm all for you. Just something or other, be careful, don't offend people. I wasn't really offensive. It was honestly just a sense of, when you become an actor, after a long period of time, certainly as opposed to the beginning, where your sense of choice about how you can do something is very limited. When you become a professional after many years and have a great deal of experience, I'll slice it a little bit to the left, or I'll go a little lower, a little up. You enjoy having this kind of capacity. I didn't, and I had to do what I believed, and if I didn't believe it, I couldn't do anything. So I had to do what I wanted to do.
Also around that time, John, you made some really big movies with some really well-known people. First, let's talk about Summer Love, where you played the lead role of Jimmy Daly, and also in Rock Pretty Baby with Jill St. John.
Yes. Jill St. John was in the second. The first was called Rock Pretty Baby. I think it was maybe my third or fourth film, and it was a success. Studio picture, didn't cost that much. We went out on a tour of 26 cities in 26 days promoting it, and it was a success, so they made another one right away called Summer Love, and Jill St. John was in that one. So was Rod McCune, who for a while was considered our poet something or other, and other people. Troy Donahue was in it. A lovely, lovely, I'm getting one of my senior moments, I can't remember all the names. Anyway, but that was with the beach pictures, dramas, family dramas of the time.
Let's get on to Unforgiven, not the Clint Eastwood Unforgiven, but the John Huston Unforgiven, which had a fantastic cast with Burt Lancaster, Audrey Hepburn, Audie Murphy, and Lillian Gish. Let me ask you a little about Audie Murphy.
Yes, it's interesting. I've just been invited to go to Fort Worth because they're commemorating a stamp, postage stamp, to Audie Murphy as a hero, an American war hero, which he was. I did two things with him, and I can't remember which came first. It was a little studio movie called Posse from Hell and The Unforgiven. I'm not sure which was first. I think maybe Posse from Hell. I can't even remember. But the little experience I had with Audie was that he liked me. You know what he thought? He thought I was Greek. Yeah, he did. I think during the war in Italy, he must have got a bad taste with the Italians or something. He says, "You're not Italian. You're really Greek, aren't you?" I said, "No, I'm Italian. I'm really very." But he must have liked me because a couple of times I met him. I remember when we were working late at night, I saw him all alone in a coffee shop, and he was in great emotional stress and pain, and he started talking to me and sort of almost in a sense of confiding. He was asking me, "Have you ever been in love with two women at the same time?" And I said, "No." Because I was not very old at that time. I didn't have opportunity to get into that. But he apparently was. There was a part of him that was extremely sensitive, but he was at times quick-tempered. When we were doing The Unforgiven, out of amusement, he fired a .22 target pistol over my head and Doug McClure's head from across a river. Pow, pow, and was hitting something behind us. It was, of course, about 2 or 3 feet above our head, but he was probably a very, very excellent marksman and knew what he was doing. But I thought, oh boy, this is a little too much.
Did he ever talk about his war experiences, or did you ever ask him?
Oh, no. I don't think that would have been wise. I don't know what it was, but it must have been something that triggered him, because he apparently did things that were absolutely almost irrationally brave, you know what I mean? He charged apparently hordes of Germans and took them prisoner and what have you, and did all kinds of things that men don't ordinarily in their right mind even try to do.
Another larger-than-life character that you worked with in a film called The Plunderers was Jeff Chandler. He only died a few years later.
He died in 63 or something like that. I knew him from just when I was put under contract. I first saw Audie when he was working on his own life story called To Hell and Back, and probably was introduced to him as one of the young contract players, a quick, brief introduction. Jeff Chandler I would see on the studio lot in the commissary, and he was very friendly. He too, there was something melancholy about both these guys. Very different, I think, in background and so on. Jeff had a sense of melancholy about him, yeah.
It's hard to believe because, they would have been huge stars. I mean, they would have had the world at their feet, wouldn't they, John?
That's the assumption, but if you look at it at any given time in the whole movie business, the whole history of it, the same time that whoever these people are who have it, as Clara Bow said, or somebody, are the objects of adoration of the whole world, their lives have never consistently been happy ones. As a matter of fact, for the most part, you can see a great deal of unhappiness, Marilyn Monroe suffered all kinds of emotional problems, and then as a result, other kinds of problems with drugs or alcohol and stuff like that. So it draws people usually who have a great deal of sensitivity and something, a pearl that they're gnawing on inside them, that they keep rubbing, something that a wound maybe. And so they don't often feel the way they look or what everybody thinks.
Yeah. Maybe they are drawn to acting because they can relieve some of that pain.
Yeah, I think that's one of the wished for things about acting, about that here you get...
You can hide.
You can, hide and also sort of turn it all around. You can play act out things of great seriousness and get love instead of, I suppose, being ignored or rejection or something like that. But there's a paradox, because it's the most tentative business in the world. And people, whoever they are, the bigger, they get rejected bigger. The bigger you are, the harder you fall.
Exactly. Also, you did a film with a very young Robert Redford and a Sidney Pollack called War Hunt.
Yeah. That was another part. See, I was on contract yet, and I was getting loaned out. For example, for all of these films, Reluctant Debutante, you didn't mention, but that was a loan out. Maybe one of the first. And then The Unforgiven and The Plunderers and War Hunt were all loan outs while I was under contract to Universal. War Hunt was a little film and had these people in it, who were virtually unknown at the time. I starred in it, and I had, we might say, the central role. It was interesting. interesting. The film got good notices in New York and in many places, but the people who made it, United Artists, went into a quarrel about it. Some of them didn't understand, thought they were expecting some kind of a different action kind of. It was a kind of a poetic story, a poetic treatment of craziness and war. The film was kind of like put in a vault practically afterwards. I only got a letter a few weeks or a month ago from an attorney who was a big fan of the film, and he's trying to convince whoever owns it now to let him have the rights for DVD. He sent me a copy of the letter that he sent off to, it might be MGM or Turner, who now own that picture. So it's had this kind of funny underground. People come by and every so often say, War Hunt, wow, that was some film.
Another couple of big personalities, larger-than-life personalities. Yeah. Otto Preminger. Was his reputation that bad?
He deserved his reputation. You overlook one guy, though, that should be put, and I can put them together because, John Huston. John Huston was really a larger-than-life kind of personality and made a great impression on me. And so did Preminger. And I worked in the Unforgiven with Huston. God, I could go on for on about the things that happened during the film. But we did wind up working as actors together in The Cardinal. Huston played a bishop or something like that, and I played a Jewish boy who wanted to marry a Catholic girl, and so on and so forth. There was something that came out of it where I think I had overheard Preminger say that John Huston was the most unrealistic man in the world, and Huston said he thought that Preminger was the most unrealistic man in the world. Huston, for example, both these men being directors, Huston, at one point after a few days or a few scenes, I said, tell me something. It was a picnic. We were having a picnic one day. We went out to a little river, and somebody had made some lunch. We were all laying around shooting the breeze, and I said, so tell me, is it your theory of directing not to direct? And he said, that's right, son. He says, I hire the actors to act. The opposite was Otto Preminger, who couldn't let you do anything that he didn't want you to do or approve. I mean, you could come up with a brilliant moment, but if he hadn't decided that that's what or if you haven't consulted with him, who told you to do that? I mean, there's a story about him that I believe is entirely true because he did the equivalent with me and I saw with 4 or 5 other actors. The story was that he was with a very famous actor and he's cut. He says, you're a very good actor. This is a very simple scene. All you need to do is to be charming and to relax. Just all you need to do is to be charming and relax. Now will you relax? And I believe that's totally true because he threatened to fire me 2 or 3 times before we started, or just in rehearsals for something. He didn't like the way I had my hair cut. He didn't like the way I was at an accent. But by the end of the picture, I don't think I'd say I charmed him, but I would go over to him and I would say, now, let me get this straight. I want to do this. So he gave up. He said, do whatever you like. When you see it in the rushes, you will hate yourself. That was his thing. But he was terribly, intelligent. And as a producer, he's made some great films. Not only that, he had a great deal of courage making and releasing The Moon is Blue. Can you imagine? In 1953, when it wouldn't get a seal of approval because the word virgin was used. And he said, so the hell with the seal of approval, I'm going to release it anyway, which was like nobody would thought they would ever do that. I mean, he just defied them. But he was a terribly intelligent man. He just made a movie like as if he was a commander of a battalion, and you were always subject to suspicion that you were undermining the force or undermining his movie. Yeah.
What about Marlon Brando? Tell us a little bit about the Appaloosa.
The Appaloosa. I knew Marlon, met him through friends many years before we made this film, in the late 50s. Consequently, it was a good thing because when we started working together, I wasn't overly intimidated in any way. We grew to be kind of friendly, and I'll say one thing about him. He was not interested much. Intermittently, he would lose total interest in being an actor and being in this movie. But at the same time, he was very magnanimous. The movie took on a quality of improvisation. I wrote a good bit. I told him stories of experiences I had in Mexico. He came back to me and said, why don't we do a scene where there's an arm wrestle between us, but the scorpions are put on the board so that the loser has his wrist pressed against the scorpion. I said, okay. So I went out and wrote that. The producer came down to the set while we were filming it. He tried to devise an idea that I had to win because it was just a question, if I lost then the movie would be over. There was no more story. So I had to win. But the producer suggested, and actually was trying to really enforced the idea that I only won because I was the bad guy, the antagonist, because I had some device under the table that gave me an advantage. Brando refused to have that. His reasoning was simple. He says, if this man that is the antagonist doesn't have some stature, then my fighting against him gives me no stature when I win. But that would have been an idea that would have been very, very convenient and likable to most movie stars, because they didn't want to look like they were physically weaker. But he didn't care about that. He had bigger plans. And then he would suddenly get a great burst of energy and work very hard in the movie, and then he had to go away and do another movie, so we never finished it the way we should have, anyway.
I quickly want to get on to Bruce Lee. Now, how long have you been interested in judo?
Since I was a kid, about 7, or during the end of the Second World War, I think I saw a film where some little Japanese soldier tricks some American, shakes hands with him, and throws him over his back. And I wanted to do that since I was 7. So when I came to California and I was 18, 19, I started studying a little judo. Then years later, I studied some karate. It took some, I did it for a while with some seriousness and some regularity, karate especially, largely because it kind of kept my morale high. If things weren't going too well career-wise, I could always count on it. Give it my all there, in the dojo. But it was a thing that I didn't want to make a career of in any way. I didn't really ever want to make any movies that had to do with it. I couldn't even imagine it, honestly. But then all of a sudden, when I became less interested and less, let's say, had less of an alliance to the whole myth of Budo and martial arts and so on, I saw this story called Enter the Dragon, which wasn't all that much of a story on script. But I thought, you know what? Gee whiz, everybody seems to be interested in this now. Over these years, at first it was something you couldn't find, a karate dojo here in Los Angeles. You had to go and search it out somewhere. But they were all over the place. So I realized the interest in the subject had grown a great deal, and I thought, this film is going to do okay. That's why I got onto that one.
And did you know Bruce Lee beforehand?
I had heard about him. I had never met him until I arrived in Hong Kong. The following day, we arrived, my family, my son, my wife. I called him, and he said, come on over. We met, and he showed me his vast gymnasium and library, and we became kind of friendly and talked a great deal about martial arts, which to me, I started out being sort of a kind of a physical culturist as a kid. I guess I felt like I had to put my body together or something. The martial arts can be a way of doing that, just as other sports can, like swimming and whatever, So I always try to stay in some degree of physical condition. I'm no Iron Man by any means. As a matter of fact, right now I got a pulled groin and I'm limping, so worse than ever. But that's what my interest in it is at this point.
We're just about out of time. We haven't got time to talk about you in a film with Dario Argento called Tenebrae and The Nightmare on Elm Street films, and you recently did Dusk Till Dawn. What are you up to at the moment, John? Any new projects on the horizon?
I'm going to be going to work in a few hours. Yeah, a film called Night Class. It's a little caper type thing with Sean Young, Eddie Albert, Edward Albert, his father is Eddie Albert, Edward Albert Jr., myself, and a young man named Rick Peters who lived in Australia. He's an American, but we got to talking about Australia the first day on the set, and he did his Aussie accent, which was really good.
Yeah. That's good. It's good to hear a good Australian accent, because it's butchered most of the time. Well, thank you very much, John Saxon.
My pleasure. Thank you.